Welcome everybody back to our Position Focus here at CycloneFanatic.com. Austen Arnaud joins me as always. We're talking linebackers today. Really, Austin, if you look at it, I think most people would agree the strength of Iowa State's football team. You have two, it's not hyperbole, you have two All-American candidates in Jake Knott and A.J. Klein. Pretty much every magazine you pick up, preseason magazine, has those guys on all Big 12 teams. Rightfully so. I think to be frank, I think you're kind of an idiot if you don't at this point with the type of numbers that these two have put up over the last 2 years. And we could sit here and toot their horns, and we will from now until kickoff. But I think today we'll talk a little bit about Knott and Klein, but I want to dig a little deeper. What's behind those guys? What happens if, God forbid, one of them would go down? But I guess we'll start with Knott and Klein. I mean, you played with the both of them. Not the most gifted athletes in the world.
Right.
What makes them different? What makes Jake Knott and A.J. Klein different than the rest and some of the other guys you played with?
Their unbelievable work ethic. I mean,
really?
those guys are the definition of all in. They bring their hard hats, their lunch pails to work every day, and they grind. A.J. was a guy who, from the start, kind of was, you didn't know if he was going to be that type of grinder until he hit a point in his sophomore year, I believe, when I was a senior, where he just took off. And late in the season, just took off. And Jake's always been the same kind of guy. Both guys are dumb tough. I mean, if Wally told them to run through a brick wall and attack the B gap, they would run through the big brick wall and then attack the B gap.
Just like when Jake's shoulder deal last year and Baylor pops it back into place.
That says more than anything that you'll need to know is that these guys are going to play regardless. Rain, hail, sleet, or snow, injury. Not injured, they're going to play and they're going to be there 100% of the time.
Paul Rhodes essentially had to save Jake Knott from himself
a
couple times last year and really not letting him play in spring ball because Jake would have overdone it because that's just what Jake does.
Yes.
And that's why he's the player he is. Okay, well, let's move on. We don't need to spend too much time on that. I want to look at what's next. I thought one of the most encouraging things to come out of spring football was that Jeremiah George, really, behind A.J. Klein there, he's a guy who played as a true freshman, played some special teams.
Yep.
Very highly touted.
Yeah.
Out of high school. I remember he blew a bunch of us away on his media day freshman year, and we're thinking, man, this guy's going to be really good. Well, he didn't really do much as a sophomore either. He didn't have a ton of opportunity, and you're kind of wondering when's he going to do his thing at Iowa State. Well, every coach would tell you that he had a better spring than anybody else on the roster.
Yes.
Offense and defense. Give us some analysis on Jeremiah George and how he can help this football team.
No doubt the most improved player on that roster from the end of last year until now. A guy who, every time I see him, for his body shape and his capabilities, and you've seen him, he looks even bigger. And that for a guy like that to look even bigger each time you see him is unbelievable because he's already swole as it is. So you look at Jeremiah George and his learning curve as a player. He'll tell you, he'll be the first one to tell you, he was behind the curve when he got here. And it took him a while to understand how to practice. That's the biggest thing when you come to the Big 12 and come to practice. You have to learn how to practice. And that's one thing that Jeremiah didn't know how to do for the first year. And then it got better and better. And now to a point where, he'll tell you, like I said, he'll tell you himself that, he wasn't much of a football player before this year. He said that out in the public. So it's just he's had a great spring, and hopefully that can translate into better things in the fall. Just because of the simple fact that he was that guy that was challenged by the coaching staff, by every one of those defensive coaches and Coach Rhodes saying, hey, this is the time. I expect you to get better. We need you to get better. And I believe he did.
And that's a good backup to have. That's a really good backup to have going into the season. Another guy you talk about is Jevin Miller.
Yep.
Another kind of a similar story, not a similar player to George, but, he came in early. He graduated early from high school, so he had that extra spring under his belt, and that catapulted him to play some special teams as a true freshman. And the thing that I've always gotten from him, and even Jake Knott's told me this too, is while Jake didn't play this past spring, Jevin Miller, they're taking all the #1 reps in the spring. He had the bowl practices last year. To me, he seems like a guy who maybe not ready to go in and start right now. I mean, you don't obviously want Jake Knott to go down, but if he did, I don't think it'd be the end of the world either. No. I think he's ready to put in some quality playing time.
He's a viable option, and the thing that you love about a kid like Jevin Miller is his work ethic as well. He's an Iowa kid, homegrown, tough kid, and for the best possible situation for him was this spring. You know, he has Jake Knott and Wally coaching him every day. He has film study available where he's getting reps with, you know, live bullets, the ones against, you know, guys like James White, Jeff Woody, guys who are going to play in the Big 12 and get, you know, rack up some yards. So that's the best situation I think he could have encountered in the spring, that he got all the reps with the ones, you know, mostly, and was able to have Jake behind him and Wally behind him, you know, telling him what he did do right and what he did do wrong, just for the simple fact that, you know, there's going to be a time this year where, you know, Jake's probably going to be banged up a little bit. We've seen that in the past, and he's got to be able to step in and play that role.
Well, I like his attitude.
No doubt.
You can't judge a player by his attitude, but I certainly have been impressed by Jevin Miller. We don't need to talk too much about nickel. We've talked a lot about it in the past with our defensive back. But overall, linebacker position, as we said in the opening, Austin, it's probably the overall. I mean, when you're talking, I would say starters-wise, it's by far the strength of this football team. I think if you want to talk depth, I think you got to throw a running back right into the mix and potentially wide receiver as well, which we're going to talk about on our next position focus. So stay tuned to that. Thanks to Austen Arnaud. We'll be going position by position here over the next few weeks, breaking down the 2012 Iowa State Cyclones here at CycloneFanatic.com.